Welcome to Eggs, the podcast, featuring the best and brightest minds in business leadership, entrepreneurship, and technology. Today we have a very special guest joining us, Caleb Mellas. Caleb is a senior software engineer and tech lead at Olo Inc., a billion-dollar restaurant company. With over 10 years of experience working with growing tech startups, small business leaders, and executive teams, Caleb brings a wealth of knowledge in design, development, and project management. Throughout his career, Caleb has had some incredible opportunities, one of which being included among 8 engineers at a hyper-growth startup called Wisely, which achieved a 4x increase in revenue and a 9-figure acquisition. Today we'll be deep diving into Caleb's journey from his early days as a graphic designer to becoming a full-stack engineer and what's next. We'll explore the challenges he's faced, the lessons he's learned, and the insights he has to offer. Please join us in welcoming to the show our special guest, Caleb Mellas. Hey Caleb, how are you, man? Welcome to the show.
Hey Ryan, thanks for having me. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thrilled to death to have you here. So we talked a little bit about it in the intro, or sort of broke down what you do and all that stuff. But let's hear it right from the horse's mouth. So why don't you give us a little background on what you do and why you do it?
Yeah, totally. Like your intro said, I am a senior software engineer. I'm currently working at Olo Inc. Actually, 3 weeks ago, I just switched into engineering management. So I've been working on that for about a year. And that's a difficult transition sometimes to make. But I've had a lot of great mentors over the years, and I've just seen like the impact that you can have as an engineering plus people leader. So really wanted to step into that. So all my old imposter syndrome's creeping up. I feel like I'm starting over. But it's awesome. Like one thing I've learned in my career is that when you see the imposter syndrome creep up, rather than like wondering if you're a fake, like I did for so long, you can actually view it as a sign you're in like a rocket season of growth. So that's what I'm currently leaning into.
I like that.
No, I love that. Well, and it's a cool way of looking at this imposter syndrome, right? And as you were saying it, I'm thinking, God, we need to coin some new way of talking about this, right? Because I think at the end of the day, this imposter syndrome is kind of what you led into. It really is that you're on some sort of, rapid growth. And that's why you feel uneasy, is because you don't know what's next. You're figuring it out. You're firing through this thing and you're moving quickly, and so in order to get that, you've got to get into these, levels of discomfort or whatever, and break through this fear. And so I don't know what it is. Maybe as we sit and visit, we'll talk about it. But yeah, I mean, we need to figure out how to reposition
the imposter syndrome.
Sorry, imposter syndrome.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, no, sorry. I'm dealing with this shoulder pain issue, which is why I'm sitting at like a 45-degree angle, and
no worries.
It's killing me. So I'm a little flighty. So
I think it's huge.
Let's
for
talk
our industry. Yeah, totally. Go ahead, Mike.
Talking about imposter syndrome. You started off as a landscaper and then got into software. Can you maybe kind of go from that into how you went from landscaping into being a senior engineer?
Yeah, totally. So when I was I'm gonna say 15, I loved being outside. I loved sports. I wasn't a very indoor person, and I always thought, man, desk jobs, I don't know if I could ever do one. And I just needed a way to make some summer money, and so got a lawnmower, started mowing my neighbors' lawns. And then they started asking me, hey, can you mulch our flower beds? Hey, can you help me put up this landscape wall? We have a guy who can help you. So I just started kind of taking on larger and larger projects. I figured out one time I aerated somebody's lawn and I charged them $60. It only took me an hour. So I was like, wow, holy crap, you can make a lot of money. So then I just started to kind of optimize for my revenue. I almost thought I would go into that. And then I started to realize I don't know if that's actually my passion or if that's just something I'm doing right now to earn money. And just I've always been technically minded. I've always been interested in computers, cameras, AV stuff. So I just kind of started leaning more into that. And that's how and I'm also really into art and music. And so I first started going from landscaping to kind of graphic design as just this is really fun and interesting. And then I checked out a book on HTML from the library, and I was like, wow, I could put my designs on the internet. Like it kind of felt magical. And so that's kind of how I started my early beginnings and what I would call like basic web design.
Love that. It's funny because your story kind of aligns with Ryan and I's story. Like we're both. I've been a DJ for 26 years. Ryan's a graphic designer, but I dabble in landscaping as well, and now I'm dabbling with software. And it's kind of, I did it backwards from you. I took a long break to begin with, and now I'm kind of like, oh, let's try this out.
Yeah,
But
that's cool.
yeah. So, what was your first kind of paid gig? How'd you, move from that into getting money with it?
Yeah, totally. I wrote a LinkedIn post about this because it was such a cool story. So I had a friend who knew a small business owner, and they were like, "Hey, we heard you are messing around with HTML and CSS. We need a new website for our business. Would you want to do it for us? Just like volunteer, but like you'd get a bunch of good experience." I was 17. I was like, "Sure, what the heck? Like, let me try it." So worked on that for like 2 months, built them a basic website for their remodeling company, shipped it, thought everything was done. And then 6 weeks later, they sent me a check for like $500. And that was kind of a light bulb moment for me. Like, I really loved doing this and somebody paid me for it. Maybe I could make this a job. And so that was the start of my freelancing journey. I had another friend, my next door neighbor, they ran an insurance company. It was just a small business. And they were like, "Hey, we heard you made that website. Would you make one for us?" And I was like, "Sure, but I'm going to charge triple what I did for the last one." So I kind of kept doing that. I realized like, yes, I'm new at this, but I am decent at it. And so just every project I took on, I almost like doubled my rate to get me more up to like what I could make a living on.
Yeah.
Nice.
I wonder, so back to our ideas about imposter syndrome, like
Yeah.
you're taking these steps that are pretty big, from I've never done this before to now I'm doing it professionally, even if it's only $500. And then going from that next one to, triple that, you said 1,500. So, and then triple that and beyond, however long you're able to keep going on that. But like, I mean, you certainly had to. I mean, I guess you were a young man at the time, so maybe the ego hadn't crept in totally. Or was, all encompassing. So maybe you weren't feeling the imposter syndrome at the time, but you for sure were taking these dramatic leaps. And so I wonder if you could talk about those in the frame of whatever we're going to call imposter syndrome down the road, which is this, is it truly being an imposter if you're just willing to try? Right. So like, is it really imposter syndrome or is it something else?
Yeah, totally. I actually had way less imposter syndrome when I was starting my business because to me, I was kind of just doing it for fun. And I was living for free at my parents' house. So I had like no need to make a ton of money up front. And that's actually, I feel like is key sometimes when you're starting something is if you have, I feel like you can succeed either way, but you'll have way more pressure if, let's say, overnight you need to make a living wage when you start a new business. Like that can be fire under your seat to kind of get you going, or it can kind of tank you and cause a ton of imposter syndrome to come up. So for me, it wasn't until years later that I had been freelancing for 3.5 years. And then one of my freelancing clients wanted to hire me for a full-time gig. It wasn't until I had to actually go through an interviewing process that I was like, wait, this is kind of for real now. Like other software engineers are going to review my work. They're going to interview me and like, I don't know if I'm ready. That's when it started to creep in.
I can relate to that because I've been doing software for about 5 years now. And the thought of someone else reviewing my code or doing a peer review scares the hell out of me. It's like, just let me do it on my own and I'll show it to you afterwards. Come on.
Yeah.
So I get that. Was that Wisely that your first interview kind of came up on?
That was not. I worked for an events management company before that for about 5 years. They were one of my freelancing clients, and eventually they just had so much work to do that they wanted to hire me. So I only was making about 36K a year for my freelancing business, but I also only worked 30 weeks out of the year. I did a lot of volunteer opportunity stuff. So to me, it was sort of a living wage I could sustain back what is it, 7 or 8 years ago now. And I was loving volunteering for the community and doing other things. But yeah, basically when I told one of my clients, hey, I'm going to work for this event startup, they all were like, we love you. How about we offer you a full-time gig? So I had 3 companies offering me a gig at once, which ended up helping me negotiate a better offer.
That's a good problem to have.
That's great. One of the things I wanted to touch on just in your freelance career, and I picked this up from another podcast, but I think it's something useful. It comes up on this show a lot and in other podcasts I listen to, is you mentioned on this other interview that you had brought in some sort of like business coaching or some mentorship, some people like that to help you try and stabilize your freelance income. And for anybody who does freelance work, this is a very common issue. This sort of feast famine cycle, they call it, where you've got money this month, but you may not get it again for 6 months. And,
totally.
which is pretty unsustainable and hard to manage. And I think you can get away with it a little more as a young person. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of breaking out of that. I mean, it sounds like you weren't running a high dollar freelance career. It was enough to manage you, but clearly even just to stay alive, like to get your budget kind of balanced, it seems to be a good thing.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you talk a little bit about that feast famine cycle and breaking out of that.
Yeah, I think I was, I was still pretty young. So I wasn't trying to make a ton of money, or I didn't need to. But one of my business mentors, I was telling him about my business, and it was just a friend I knew that ran his own business. And he was like, I was like, it's doing great. He's like, no, like legit, tell me how much money you're making. And I was like, 12,000. And he's like, dude, you're 24 years old. This is not a living wage. Like, I don't know how you're sustaining that. And so he like walked me through a few things, and he was like, oh, you have this feast famine going on. And he's like, you need to calculate out how much you're actually making, because you told me like, yeah, you made 5K off this one client, but you didn't get another one for 6 weeks. So what was your actual earnings per hour, plus all the marketing time to get the next client, plus all the office time of back and forth emails and redesigns and tweaks to the website? So I figured out I was actually making like $4 an hour. And that was kind of a wake up call for me.
Deflating.
I also took this course called Double Your Freelancing Rate by Brennan Dunn. And he was just like, double your rate overnight. You're not charging enough. And it freaked me out. But I was like, it's actually true. Like, I really need to do that. So literally I just called up all my clients, and one of them I tripled it and one I doubled, and no one left. So that kind of helped my imposter syndrome, because I was freaked out before that. And then when I doubled it, they're like, your value is so much that we still want to work with you. So my main thing though, to get out of that feast famine, was actually lining up retainer clients and making sure I did the marketing, for my new clients before the old one left off. So I tried to get enough retainers that I had, 12 month contracts with them that I could live off that amount. And then I tried to sell deals throughout the year that would just kind of be bonus.
That's smart.
Yeah, no, I love that.
Go ahead, Ryan. Were you going to say something?
No, that was it. I was just commenting.
Oh, okay. So you get in with the event company. Can you tell us about the first 6 months of working with them and going from freelance to now you're an employee? That's kind of a game changer right there. Yeah. What was the main things that changed?
Yeah. I came in, they had seen some of my work when I was freelancing, and they had a web app that only worked for desktops. And they knew that I specialized in responsive design. That was in the day that everybody wanted their app to be responsive. They were all stuck at, 1,500 pixels wide for their desktop. And so they kind of hired me as an expert, which I felt really good about. But then 6 months in, they're like, hey, we actually need you to be a front-end designer, developer. And I was like, well, I don't really know that, but sure. So they asked me to learn AngularJS, and that's kind of where my imposter syndrome started creeping back up, because I felt like I started over. Like I was okay at WordPress sites and HTML and CSS, but I don't know what Angular is. And now I'm doing like production level front end development.
Yeah, that is very intimidating. Part of the reason why I haven't really gone out and looked for work is because I don't want to learn a whole new stack, oh, I'm doing Next.js right now. Let's move to Python, or let's do the Vue, or, any of that stuff. It seems very intimidating to come into a new code stack and have to figure it out. Are there things that you do when you come into that scenario that help you kind of move along faster?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've written about this before, and one thing that I try to do is I try to kind of two things. So one thing is I try to make my learning consistent rather than like sporadic hustling. So what hung me up for a long time is like I was trying to take this complex Angular course that was like a really deep dive. It was like 40, 50 hours. There was all these assignments you had to do, but it was kind of overwhelming. So what I would do is I would just try to do it on the weekends, but I only ended up doing it like once every 3 weekends for 4 hours. And then I would pretty much forget it all 2 weeks later. And so I kind of got stuck in my career for about 7 months. And one day I was just super frustrated. I just sat down and was like, all right, forget that. Let me just try 30 minutes a day. I will force myself to do this for 12 months and see what happens. So it was kind of painful, but it also really helped me level up. Like my boss called me up like 7 months later and was like, holy crap, like you're growing insane. And like, he even said like, don't grow too fast. I don't know if we can afford you anymore.
Yeah. Was that based off of the Atomic Habits book? Is that what spurred that? Okay.
Yeah. 2 books. One of them was Atomic Habits and one was actually a kid's book. I have a son and my wife had gotten this kid's book called The Tortoise and the Hare, and I was reading it. And I remember her saying like, babe, you need to have like a year of the tortoise. And I was like, yes, that's what I'm doing. So like I talk about that now, just like the tortoise always wins the race. And it's kind of actually related. I took the lesson away from my freelancing, where before I was trying to do these random spikes of high income, but now what I'm trying to do is these steadiness. And then whenever I have a day, like a Saturday where I'm feeling super motivated, I'll do 4 hours. But like every day in the week, I'm doing that consistent baseline of learning.
Yeah, that makes complete sense, especially in this field, because there's so much data to learn and so much to take on that if you try and do it all at once, it's just overwhelming. So it makes complete sense.
It certainly prepares you, for the rapidly changing like tech environment. This is one of the big things I think that's a struggle for tech folks or people who work in software engineering, is that the landscape changes so rapidly that to do it the traditional way, right? Just go to a regular university and go through a program. Like it might get you some fundamental stuff, but unless you are doing this continuing education, you'll never keep up. And so I think it's really important. And I think that too, this slower and steady approach, sorry, I'm really obsessing on this imposter syndrome thing, but I think there's sort of 2 things here, right? The tortoise is the guy that's taking his time. He's being methodical. He's being thoughtful about his process. The rabbit is the guy that's just hauling ass and not taking any names and just cruising, right? Yeah. And I think that as it pertains to overcoming imposter syndrome or whatever we're calling it, trying to psychologize it, I think that being the guy who takes the time and works methodically and really deeply understands what he's doing or he or she is doing, it seems to me that person develops the confidence requisite to feel good about where they're at versus somebody who's raced through it and tried to learn it over a weekend or something like that. And at the end of the day, you're both being looked at as professionals, but one of you feels really good about where you've landed and the other is not totally there yet, And so I think that there's really something to that sort of metaphor of the rabbit and the hare. And I think the other thing I just wanted to comment on, or that I noticed in the way you talk about it, is that it seems too that you're willing to sort of accept people's assessments of you or accept other people's perceptions, meaning you are being told that, man, you're growing too fast. We're not going to be able to afford you. And you're like, yeah, I know. Right. Like you're confident there. You're like, you're growing through this stuff, but hearing it from an outside person sort of to validate you seems like that might give you the confidence to move forward too. And I think a lot of people will hear that kind of feedback from a boss or a coworker or something and just blow it off, or they have such low belief in themselves maybe that they can't even hear that kind of feedback. So I think it seems like, at least from what you've said so far about your trajectory, that being able to accept other people's perception of you is, maybe a valuable part of overcoming this this imposter syndrome.
Yeah, totally. I think one thing I would add to that, breathe the slow and steady growth, is that personally, I'm someone who likes to grow very aggressively. And so if I don't feel that imposter syndrome for like 6 to 12 months, I almost get a little worried because I know I'm not challenging myself like I have throughout my career. And so one thing I always encourage engineers who are like, I want to grow fast, I want to get promoted. I'm like, seek out a challenging project that is really going to challenge you, that maybe has one other engineer you can learn from. And I know you're going to feel like horrible. You're going to be like questioning your skills. Like, what is my boss thinking of me? But like jumping into a project like that with someone else you can learn from is going to skyrocket your growth. That's what I found when I joined the startup Wisely. Was someone described it as all like the 10% of kids at college that are doing all the work and everybody's like copying off their answers. Like all the 10% kids were at Wisely. And I joined feeling pretty confident about my skills and I crushed their interview process. But like once I joined, they were kind of all running circles around me. And I had to embrace that and just be like, all right, this is my next chance to level up. And that's where I would say, like, yes, I was consistent in my learning, but I also took that hustle and just said, like, let me apply hustle for like 2 to 3 months because I'm really in the season that I need to grow. And so applying like consistency plus just like, all right, this is a time to really hustle to kind of step me up a little bit. I think those can play together nicely.
So is that why you pursued Wisely? Did you feel you were getting a little stagnant where you were?
I was, yeah. I kind of went from like being a member of the team. Their team was downsizing. It also, like, the company didn't do as well through COVID because they were mostly in-person events. So I started looking around and I really wanted to join a company that was fast-paced, that was growing, and that had engineers I could learn from. Because I knew that had been a huge part of my growth previously, was just learning from other really smart engineers. So when I interviewed with them, like, everyone like blew me away in their interviewing process, and I knew like I had to work there. So it just made me work all the harder to try to stand out during interviewing.
What sort of things did you do to stand out during interviewing?
Yeah, I did a few
Was this
things.
your first official interview? Like,
pretty much, yeah, because
okay.
At the event company, like, the founder interviewed me over dinner and I didn't even realize it was an interview. And then I sort of had the job in his mind, but their engineering team was like, oh, let's test him on this like take home, which I ended up doing. But it wasn't really an official interview to me. Versus at Wisely, like, they had a like 5 to 7 step process that I went through all the way from their engineers to CEO. Yeah, one thing that I did to stand out was I treat interviewing kind of like sales and relationship building, where I know it's going to take like 7 points of good contact to make an impression and to stand out. So every time there's a conversation, I'm trying to follow up and see, like, was there anything you needed from me? Hey, I was reading on your blog about this. What you said meant, like, reminded me of that, and like drop a little nugget to show that I'm like really into it. And then once I made it to their take home project, I wasn't sure how many engineers they were interviewing, but it seemed like they were growing really fast. They had tripled their revenue the year before, so I thought it might be pretty competitive. And so I just decided, like, I'm going to build a production app of what they're asking me to do. And so I ended up taking like 30 hours on it, and they told me most engineers did about 4 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah. I think that definitely made me stood out. Like, long term, I don't think that's great for the industry because I'm pretty privileged that I could spend that amount of time versus some folks can't. So I don't really think that's necessarily the best interview process, but like, it worked for me to get my foot in the door.
Well, if you're going into something that's full time and they're paying you that kind of money, 30 hours isn't that much, to be honest with you. So, especially if it helps you stand apart. So,
well, and I love that too, because I think there's a lot of people who don't put extra into the interview process. You know what I mean? Like, they're kind of jumping hoops, or maybe they feel owed or something like that. And your story reminds me, I mean, my first agency job, I gave them a month of my design time for free. And I in exchange for letting me sit through client meetings and learn how an agency operated. And so that was my trade. And they ended up taking me up on it. And then actually 2 years later offered me a job. So, wow. I mean, but it was just like you're saying, you know, foot in the door, but it was doing that like absurd thing, you know, that was like well above and beyond. And it also took them taking me up on it, right? It was a risk on their part too, because I mean, I hit up maybe 20 agencies and just one said yes. So, you know, but ultimately they went on to become, you know, I mean, they hired me. I worked for them for 3 years and I'm still their biggest freelance supplier now.
Wow.
So, you know, and that's been 10 years now. So, I mean, it really turned into something by just kind of, you know, going above and beyond. So I love that.
Yeah, totally. I've found that I've talked to a lot of people in the industry about this, and I think that people in executive positions are used to doing the types of things I did, where it's like they do a ton of deep dive research on the company. They try to network with people on LinkedIn who are, you know, top leaders in the company, meet them, read all their blogs, and they try to like get their brain into the problems the company's solving, things like that. But like most software engineers aren't going to do that. They're just like spraying and praying applications to hundreds of companies. And then kind of when they show up in the interview, it's just 1 out of 300, which is fine. It's like sometimes you need to do that. But I encourage other engineers to pick your like top 10 to 15 companies and go super deep into those and try to stand out.
No, I think that's great advice because, I mean, like you say, so many people just like indiscriminately hand out resumes. And then I see them on LinkedIn complaining to one another that, oh man, I've filed 500 resumes and nobody's hired me. It's like, well, why are we doing this then? Like, we should maybe rethink our process. Like, you're spending so much time doing this that, you know, you're clearly not getting the attention. And the way you put it, I really like, which is that the interview process is really about relationship development and, you know, trying to build that in. And I mean, as I think about my own career, I mean, nearly every opportunity I've ever had has come through some relationship, by word of mouth, or I learned about a job through a friend or by a referral or whatever. And even now, most of the business in our agency is that way. You know, it's all come by relationships. You know, I mean, very little things just come straight through the internet for us. And so I think it's really important to look at the interview process that way. I mean, and it's a two-way street, right? They need to learn who you are. Totally. They need to know that as much as you need to know, do I actually want to work for these people?
Yeah, totally. It should be kind of like a mini dating relationship where you're trying to figure out, are they a good fit for me? Are they going to pay me well? Do they have a culture I'd thrive in? Do they need what I can offer? And you the other way as well. So
Exactly.
Well, and I think, you know, there's some liberties that we can take there that, you know, maybe aren't available to everybody, which is that, you know, I guess if you're desperate for work and you've got to just take anything that somebody can give you, then, you know, that's one thing. Right. It seems like in software or, you know, any industry basically where you have sort of a tangible skill set that's worth, you know, money, it seems like you do have a little bit of an opportunity to do more of that dating phase. So I think it's important to look at it that way because, I mean, I've taken plenty of jobs, you know, in the throes of feast and famine, where it's like, this is a bad idea. I know it's a bad idea, but I've got to pay the bills this month. Totally. And so I think it's great to have the attitude you've got.
So you get on with Wisely and you're one of 8 in the software development team. Is that, I mean, the scale that they were going through in such a short amount of time, that sounds really daunting to be in a group of that small, doing that much work. Can you talk about the first year or two that you're there and then the acquisition? Yeah,
totally. So I was actually engineer 4 that they hired. So we didn't even have 8. Once we had 8, I felt like we had a big team. I think they hired a lot of product engineers is what I call them, where engineering was actually driving a lot of what we were building. We had like a lot of visionaries on the team, but then they would just kind of cast the vision and engineering would figure out how to build them rather than like maybe at a more established company. And even now it's like the product team's super involved and we have Jira tickets that we're kind of just working through. Back then it was like you had a lot of influence and autonomy as an engineer and you had to be very like user and product oriented. I signed on as engineer 4. we quickly like jumped in and started building projects. My first flop was kind of, they assigned me a 2 point task. So that's like a day or two. And it ended up taking me 6 weeks. So I
Wow.
kind of freaked out and like, but they kept telling me like, oh, we didn't realize how complex the code was. It was across 7 different legacy code bases that I had to touch. And so I think I kind of proved myself that I just dove in head first on that really complex project, and just kept managing up in a way. Like I didn't disappear for 6 weeks and then tell them like I was done. Like every couple days I was checking in and saying like, hey, I know we thought it might take me 2 days. I ran into these 10 things. I've documented them here. I've solved 3 of them. Like, are you good for me to keep going? And they would keep saying, yes, that's great. And so like giving visibility to your work is huge when you don't have like clear processes for that at a more established company. Go ahead.
So, are you allowed to talk about, what the stack was and what some of the functionality was that you were working on?
Yeah.
Or is that okay?
So we had a JavaScript tech stack from the front end to the back end. We used Vue.js. On the back end, we used Node, and just like standard Postgres database stuff. So I think you can find that on the Wisely website somewhere, interviewing. Okay. So I'm not sharing any trade secrets. But yeah.
What was Wisely? What was the product?
Yeah. The product was the vision of the founder, Mike, who had this idea that he used to be a waiter at a restaurant. And what he noticed was he was one of the best waiters there. Back up. He was one of the newer waiters there. And he noticed that all these waiters that had a ton of relationship built with the different customers would, when someone came into this high-end restaurant, they would say like, oh, hey, Dave, great to see you. Do you still prefer your outside with your old fashioned? And they'd be like, yep, great. And so they would already have the drink ready, like on the table for this person.
Oh, wow.
And so he just realized, wow, like all that knowledge is stuck in the head of the waiter. And what would it be like if literally every guest at the restaurant and every server could provide the same VIP experience? So part of their tagline was like, treat every guest like a regular. And so their first product was called the Host product. And it was basically that stand that you see, the iPad app, when you go to a sit down restaurant where they can kind of put you at a table. But it had a lot of info about your guest. There was a guest profile of like your favorite order and where you like to sit, things like that. So more information so that every server could treat you like that regular.
That's incredible. That's genius.
That was one of their products. And then what I more worked on was called their marketing products. So they had 2 products. One of them was called marketing automation. And that's basically like when a guest does something, you can market to this guest based off their data. So most restaurants are kind of stuck in the dark ages of marketing where like they will send out a like free bacon, come in and get your free bacon. But it's like all the vegans unsubscribe, And so they haven't caught up to e-commerce where they're kind of tracking your orders and they know some of your likes and dislikes. And so what Wisely did was they started tracking some of that guest data per brand and surfacing those insights. So now you could run an automation that said like, based on a guest action of like guest ordering, you could run what's called a segment. So you could get a list of guests that their lifetime value is over $200. They used to go to your restaurant once a week and we haven't seen them in 3 weeks. Send them a coupon for their favorite meal, 50% off. And you can just run that and it will go for any guest in the system.
That's genius.
Yeah.
Super cool. So one of the things that I've noticed just kind of in listening to you speak is that you seem to have what I think they would sort of call a growth mindset. And, I think that this is reflected in your learning process, in the way that you handle adversity at work, all those things. And so, but I don't think this comes naturally to everybody. And so I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about just sort of developing a personality that sets you up for success, either amid challenges like, the latest software release, or, even just in life. And I guess I'm trying to understand, is this just sort of the way you are and the way you carry yourself, or is it something you've had to develop over your career?
Yeah, I think it somewhat is the way I am, but I've also developed it. One thing I can think of specifically is that I'm a person that has a ton of ideas and I really like to innovate on processes. But when I was younger, what that would look like is like, I don't know, like I remember my dad and I were like working on a home project when I was like 18 or something. And we wanted to level out some of the back of our yard. It was just like a couple feet strip, but it was like across the whole backyard. And he was just like, oh, let's just get in there and like flatten it out with shovels. And then we're going to like hand dig like holes for a fence. And I was like,
No,
this is a horrible idea. No, like, let's just go rent a backhoe and like flatten this out. And, but he was like, I think he said like either he couldn't afford it or he was just like, we're going to be able to knock it out in a day. It wasn't worth it for him. And so, but I was really frustrated by that because I really like to innovate in things. And so I pretty much just like didn't want to help. And I was like really frustrated. So that's like the one hand where I kind of struggled to just do like really hard work. That's sometimes necessary in your career to get ahead, as well as like having that growth mindset or like innovation mindset of like learning and growing and doing things differently. So I think like over the years, I've learned like a really hard work ethic while also like pairing that with ideas to improve products I'm working on, to improve my career, to improve and coach other folks. So I think like pairing those together has been huge over the last like 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So Wisely got acquired for a large dollar amount. Can you talk about how that affected you? And I mean, as one of 8, did you get perks out of that? And then if you don't have to go into numbers or anything like that, but when it got acquired, how did that go for you? Did you get pulled into the new company?
Yes. Yeah. So I found out about it. Yeah. Our CEO was big on transparency, called us all into a room. There was about 70 of us on the team. There was still only 8 full-time software engineers. We had some DevOps, we had some support, we had a bunch of sales. There's tons of different roles in a tech company. And there was actually a few engineers that didn't make the switch. So we went up maybe to like 12 or 13 engineers, back down to 8. It kind of kept switching. But anyways, yeah, I was a little nervous. I knew I would get some kind of payout, but honestly, it was pretty early. Most of my stock vested later, so I didn't get quite as much as what I wanted, but I was still able to get a small sum, which was fun. It was kind of unexpected, so I just took it as bonus money.
Nice.
But yeah, I was a little worried because I really loved the team of Wisely. I was friends with so many people, and it was just a really bonding experience to grow so fast. So I was a little worried about the new company. I was going from 70 at Wisely to, I think Olo had 750 employees. So there was 10x more employees. I knew it would be more a little bit what people call corporate vibe in a sense. And I just kind of wanted to feel that out. So we got to meet the team. They gave us kind of a week to make the decision. And then like Mike, our old CEO, shared a lot about Noah, the new CEO, and how they were on the same page. Noah kind of gave his vision for the current culture of Olo, and they're very like learning oriented. They are like family first. So like saying work hours, they're trying to grow and innovate. So I thought that sounds great. They also gave me a 10K signing bonus if I would just come over for a couple months. So I was like, it's kind of like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So like it made the transition easy. And then one thing they did that really helped our transition was they kept the same engineering leaders over the Wisely team and the same product leaders for 1 year after the acquisition. So we were able to come over and keep building product, finish up some of our projects, and like get acclimated into the bigger team.
That's nice of them to do that instead of just throw you into the deep end and let you figure it out.
Yeah.
Keep the same structure you have and kind of gradually get into your new role. That's nice. So you've been at all different levels. You've been a entry level engineer. You've been a senior engineer. Now you're in management. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes.
What type of priorities change as you go up the ladder?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, as a junior engineer, your main focus is coding, learning how to code, learning how to build products, learning coding patterns, just getting, good fundamentals of your language. As you move to mid-level, you start to move into things like coding abstractions and architecture, trying to make code that is more maintainable and extensible, things like that, like clean code in a sense. You also start like maybe shadowing on a project. So you're not quite leading a project, but you're very close to it. So you start picking up some basic project management skills and more collaboration skills as you work with other engineers. And then a lot of companies, to get to senior engineer, you have to lead a project. That's, maybe a couple months long, and do that successfully. Like, there's a lot of project management skills, leadership skills, people skills, time management skills, surfacing blockers and like ideas for how to get around those that you have to do as a software engineer at a startup or even at some big tech companies. And so learning a lot of those along the way was really key to my growth. And then there's usually, when you hit senior engineer, there's two tracks you can take. One is you can go to staff engineer, and that's still like a contributor. You're still doing a bunch of coding, and you really kind of become like the architect of a system when you go to staff and principal. Or there's the management track, which is like engineering manager, director, VP, kind of up that way. So Olo has a step in between senior and staff. And so first I got to that level, my manager thought, engineering managers still need a lot of technical skills. And I was lacking in a few areas around like distributed systems, scaling, performance, security. They wanted to see me level up in some more of those. So I really worked hard at that for a year, as well as becoming the technical lead for my team. So being the go-to person for support, for sales, for our leadership team on the business to answer any engineering and product questions. And I feel like that helped me make a really good switch into management, which I'm only 4 weeks in, so I'm still very much into the switch. But I think one thing that was good is I just had a lot of really good managers over the last couple of years, and just them sharing that like, you're not going to be doing coding. That's one way that a lot of companies will take their best engineer and say like, you should be our manager. And then like the engineer is really frustrated because they never code anymore. So having some of my mentor managers walk me through like, as a manager, your job is not to code. Your job is to be a force multiplier for your team, to help them be the best coders they can, and to manage the projects well, but also manage the people and help them grow in their careers. And it's not going to be like I code something and 2 days later it's live on production for customers. Like there's no like quick wins anymore. It's like I'm managing and coaching someone for 12 months and I get to see them grow and become more confident and work through their imposter syndrome. So I'm kind of gearing up for the long haul, and I feel like all that imposter syndrome is creeping back up, and I'm just kind of like in it and knowing it.
Way to go full circle on that.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to just sort of add too, and maybe this is a little bit of just trying to learn about how it is in your industry versus others. But like, so in the agency world or like in the art world, there's a lot of people who, like being an artist, don't like being a art leader, right? And this is sort of what you were describing here, where, you go from coding to not coding anymore. So what have you found in terms of the kinds of tech skills you need to bring forward into a leadership position versus, maybe what you would have needed. So you came through a trajectory where you sort of step by step. So in your case, you kind of had to build all this fundamental, and maybe that's required in a tech leader, in somebody that's like running a team of software engineers. I'm just curious because in art, for example, you might have somebody who's a really brilliant thinker, but can't put pen to paper. Right. Yeah. So it might not be, so there's different skill sets and things like that. So I'm just trying to understand, what the needs are or how to balance the skills versus leadership in your job.
Yeah, totally. I think it really depends on the type of company you're at. So if you're at a traditional, let's say, and I don't have that experience, but I've heard from other leaders that say this is like some more traditional companies that have been around for 50 years, they will just hire great managers. Doesn't matter if they have any experience as a software engineer. And I think versus in tech, they really want to see people who have the engineering skills to know, like, if their software engineer is saying like, hey, we need to tackle this tech debt area, rather than just saying like, okay, sounds good. Like they have a picture of the system and know like where to pull levers with their team to make sure that the products and the teams are really successful. So at least at like engineering manager and director level, those are really required if you work at a tech company or a startup or even like big tech, versus I think at some more traditional companies, they are more focused on leadership. Just any kind of manager who's good at that can come in. I think that's kind of a two-edged sword because sometimes you can get managers who are really kind of engineers and they don't know what they're doing as far as leading a team. But the sweet spot of someone who's really good at engineering and also really good at managing a team, like those people are gems and some of the most amazing people I've gotten to work with over the last like 5 years.
That's awesome. Well, we're almost at that time and I don't want to keep you any longer than an hour. So going out on this, you've built up an incredible LinkedIn community and a network of a lot of people. Can you maybe talk about the process of doing that and why you decided to do that?
Yeah, totally. I started sharing, I guess, first off, like while I was going through my career for the last 5 years, I've tried to make really high connections on LinkedIn. I've tried to proactively reach out to startup founders and CEOs and other engineers that I wanted to just learn from. And so I had probably 600 connections that were like super high quality last year. And then December 22, I was just talking to a friend and I kind of realized I have a lot of momentum in my career. I kind of have some wind at my back with the acquisition, and I just really love teaching and encouraging other people on how to excel in their career. And so I thought, why don't I just start sharing some of my crazy stories? And so I started in between Christmas and New Year's of 22, I just started sharing. Eventually, within like a week or two, I was at 1,000 followers and I was like, okay, wow, people seem to like this. And I was mainly posting two things. One was, what would an engineer who was basically a Caleb like 3 or 4 years ago when I was kind of stuck in my career, what would they need to know to get past that? And so just helping them learn the skills for senior engineers and beyond. And then the other thing is like soft skills. I feel like there's a lot of engineers who hit a peak in their career and don't realize it's actually the soft skills holding them back. So like project management, leadership, collaboration with the team, learning how to work through conflict, that type of stuff. So I try to share a combo of those, and that's what I've been doing for the last year. I have about 18,000 followers now. And then I knew eventually, like, I don't really want to be beholden to LinkedIn's algorithm, even though I love the community on there. So I wanted to share even deeper dive over 1,200 characters. And so I started a newsletter that I send out every other week to software engineers just really looking for a deeper dive to level up in their skills. So that's called Level Up Software Engineering. And I have about 9,000 subscribers there so far.
Wow.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Brand new one here. I signed up last night.
Awesome. Great to have you.
That's awesome. Well, cool. Yeah. So Caleb, here in the closing moments, where are the places to track you down online if somebody wanted to reach out or learn more or get signed up for your newsletter for that matter?
Yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for Caleb Mellas, and then my Substack is also linked there, my newsletter. But you can also find it at levelupsoftwareengineering.substack.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, Caleb. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, Brian, Mike, it was great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do it again sometime. So thanks to Caleb, thanks to Mike, and thanks to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.